future were substantially existent, it would be unreasonable to say that a thing which will be made to occur later is substantially existent prior to its production. If that which already exists is produced later, what has already been produced will come into existence again, which is purposeless. As a consequence, the effect would find no opportunity for production, since the cause must reproduce itself until the end. Assertion: the future exists because there is yogic perception of wished-for objects which focuses on future things, and because predictions concerning the future are later seen to turn out just as predicted. This is impossible in relation to a barren woman's child.
Answer: if future things are directly perceived by way of their own entity in the period before their production, why are non-existent things not seen? It follows that they would be seen, for it is not feasible to make distinctions between what is seen and not seen with regard to the non-existent. Such fallacies arise for those who assert that the past and future exist by way of their own entity, but no fallacies accrue to us who assert the three times as arising dependently without inherent existence. Buddhists directly perceive in the present even those things which will occur after 10 million eons. Though they are future at the time of the consciousness perceiving them, they are neither non-functional nor permanent, for they will not remain for a second moment after their formation. There is no need for a Buddha to cognize the present explicitly and the past and future implicitly, for though the latter do not exist at that time, they are in general directly perceived. Similarly, it is not contradictory for objects of aspiration, though they do not exist at that time, to appear clearly to yogic perception of that which is wished for, just as a dream appears to be real.
Even though the barley seed exists, the sprout which has not yet come into existence may be called future, but the sprout itself must not be called future. An understanding of the other two times should be inferred from this. In our own system, we accept that Buddhas perceive all three times directly and do not at all assert to trainees that they merely appear to do so. Moreover, there cannot be a distant time for a protagonist for whom the future exists by way of its own entity, because the future exists in terms of its own entity. If, because the future is substantially existent, virtue exists without actions such as safeguarding one's ethical conduct once one's faculties have become mature through meeting a spiritual friend and listening to teaching, resolute restraint from unethical conduct and so forth for the sake of future results, such as a high rebirth, is meaningless, for virtue will exist even if that has not been done. If even the slightest thing is done to enhance one's capability, future effects cannot be substantially existent. It is impossible.
In accordance with the assertion that all composite things are impermanent, all functional things are impermanent. How can it be said then that an effect exists prior to its production? It is unreasonable, since impermanence and existence prior to production are contradictory. Anything which has a beginning, in that it is newly produced, and an end, in that it does not last for a second moment after the time of its formation, is called impermanent in the world. According to Sutrantikas and so forth, who assert that future functional things do not have the slightest existence, liberation will occur without any exertion to generate the paths of the exalted in order to prevent future disturbing emotions and suffering, because future things do not exist. This would be like liberated foe destroyers for whom there are no future disturbing emotions and so forth, and who thus do not need to exert themselves because of them. If the future were non-existent and desire were to arise without there being a person, consciousness and so forth or predispositions for attachment as a basis, it follows that desire would arise in a foe destroyer too.
The words, or otherwise, imply, or otherwise the future is not non-existent. Samkhyas say that since what is non-existent cannot be produced, and since the effect is present in the cause in a potential form, the fallacy that anything arises from anything does not occur. Some Vaibhasikas assert that the three times are substantially existent and that effects exist prior to their production. Sutrantikas and so forth assert that although things are truly existent, future effects are non-existent. It follows that for all of these, adornments such as pillars for a resultant home are purposeless, since according to some it exists from the outset, while according to others the future home is non-existent, like a barren woman's child. For proponents of dependent arising free from inherent existence, there is no possibility of error, and thus everything is properly established. In meditative equipoise, the exalted who are still learning do not perceive dependently arising phenomena as existent. Failure to distinguish between this non-perception and the perception of phenomena as non-existent, as well as inability to posit conventional valid cognition in one's own system, seem to give rise to numerous errors. One must therefore master the meaning of the establishment of the two truths by valid cognition in our own system. Assertion: although existence of the past and future are being refuted, the present exists. Since it does, the future exists too, for the principle, giving up its state of futurity, assumes the state of present curd. Thus the present exists.
Answer: it is not feasible for the principle, which is matter impermanent by nature, also to undergo temporary changes into things like milk and curd. Such transformations are not perceived even by mental consciousness that engages with extremely subtle objects, let alone observed by the 5 kinds of sense consciousness. Although transformation with respect to the present and its causes is not observed, those who lack wisdom and are ignorant about the meaning of suchness consider the present truly existent. Assertion: time exists because functional things which act as the basis for imputing time exist. Since time may be investigated by considering functional things but not on its own, time is truly existent.
Answer: how can functional things, the basis for time, be truly existent? It follows that they are not because of not having inherent duration. How could they have inherent duration, since they are continually consumed by impermanence? Moreover, if they had inherent duration at the start, they would not grow old in the end, because that which is inherently existent cannot cease. Furthermore, there is no inherent duration, for just as a single moment of consciousness does not apprehend 2 consecutive objects actually presenting their own likenesses, 2 consecutive moments of consciousness do not apprehend a single object simultaneously, for they undergo momentary production and disintegration.